I would like to invite the eminent Nanjala Nyabola, the last speaker of tonight. After the lecture of Nanjala, there's a fantastic performance by Francois Knutse. But Nanjala is writer, political analyst and activist based in Nairobi, Kenya. Actually, right now you're based in London, if I'm correct. Yeah. Nanjala Nyabola writes extensively about African society and politics, technology, international law, and feminism for an academic and non-academic audience. Her first book, Digital Democracy, Analog Politics, How the Internet Era is Transforming Kenya, was described as a must-read for all researchers and journalists writing about Kenya today. Is also for sale right now in our bookshop. Yay. Take it away, Nanjala.
Dank u wel.
Yeah.
Hamjambo, habari za jioni. Kwa majina kamili mimi naitwa Nanjala Nyabola. Mimi ni mwandishi, mwanahabari, mwanaharakati. Na inategemea na wakati wa siku ya wiki, mimi huwa nafanya mambo yote. Inategemea. Watu wakiniuliza mimi husema kwamba mimi hutumia hadithi kusimulia hali ya maisha na kufafanua yanayowezekana. It's hard, isn't it? Listening to someone speak and not being able to instantly place yourself in the stream of their thoughts. It's disorienting. And yet, I put it to you that that is how the vast majority of the people in the world experience the digital age. It's a space that we're told we have to embrace, we have to be a part of, we have to immerse ourselves into, and yet the vast majority of us are experiencing it in translation. And it's weird to start a talk with that here in the Netherlands because I think Dutch people are famous world over for being super bilingual. But that's just not the reality for most people, not bilingual with English. And English is, whether we like it or not, the dominant language of the digital age. I have no interest in natural language processing or artificial intelligence. Well, maybe I should rephrase that. I don't have the interest that people think that I have. I'm not a techie. I don't do what I do so that technology can be more efficient. I'm not interested in technology as a mechanical or as an economic thing. I'm interested in technology as a social phenomenon. Who are we? What are we? What will we be in a world that is built to optimize, and especially to optimize data? What will we look like, particularly at the margins? Oh, I need to go to my slides. They're not that interesting. This actually is an illustration. I only have 2 slides. This is actually an illustration that was done by my compatriot and colleague and friend, Nzilani Simu, and she put images to what I put in my essay. I'm not going to be repeating the content of my essay here today. I want to situate it in a broader conversation, kind of building off what Benjamin was talking about. So the essay, I started with language because that's my current obsession. And it's also the main reason why I wrote the essay the way that I did. We look at the same phenomenon from different vantage points, and we come away from it with different perspectives. You might have heard about the 6 blind men and the elephant. Each one touches a different part of the elephant and comes away with a different experience, a different idea. One person touches the ears, thinks it's a fan. The other one touches the tail, thinks the elephant is a snake, etc. I think this is happening with the digital age. There's a rapid expansion of digital technologies around the world, but with different characteristics, different experiences. And like I said, some of us are experiencing it all in translation. So what is the internet? What is the digital when we have different people, different communities, and a different set of foundational premises at the heart of what it is that we're trying to describe? What does it look like when we start from a different place? what interesting things are thrown up? These are my current obsessions. By now, it's no secret that internet use around the world has spiked dramatically in the last 30 years. According to our World in Data, there are 3.4 billion unique users of the internet every day. That's about half of the world's population, just under half the world's population. 27,000 people, 27,000 new users every hour. 640,000 new users every day. The most rapid increase is in India, where today there are 391 million internet users. And countries like India, Ghana, Bangladesh, Cote d'Ivoire have doubled their digital populations in the last 3 years. Even so, several poor countries, many in Africa, have less than 5% of their population connected. Now let me ask you a question. Which country do you think has the highest number of broadband connections in the world? Just yell something out.
Korea.
Actually, that is true. Damn, killed my vibe. No, that is true. The highest number of broadband connections in the world are in South Korea, followed by Germany. But the bottom line is this. Despite the dramatic increase in number of people who are using broadband, the vast majority of people in the world who use the internet are connecting through their mobile phones. And so when we think about what we're building for, the fact that many of the things that we're building for are optimized for desktops, for laptops, what are we saying about who we're inviting to participate in our conversations? What are we saying about who we envision experiencing the digital age? These are some of the things that are at the heart of the essay that I wrote, trying to think from how the object of the mobile phone has shifted our experiences of humanity in my home country, which is Kenya, zooming through society, zooming through the continent, the region, zooming out into the planetary experience of the digital as seen from the perspective of a Kenyan woman. Why a Kenyan woman? Because in a lot of places in the world, access is still gendered, right? Indian women, rural women in Africa still have a hard time getting access to the mobile phones that they use to run their lives because they are women. Young girls are more likely to be disconnected than any other group in the world. But I also wanted to do another inversion. Instead of starting with the social and starting with the people, I started with the object. I wanted to contemplate what the mobile phone was and what it was doing. Kind of flipping the logic on its head, because we're always interested in how humans act on objects and the transformations that that creates. I wanted to ask myself, and hopefully invite you as you read the essay, how do objects act on us? How do objects transform us? And highlight some of those outcomes within the essay. Now, some of the outstanding questions that this whole perspective has raised for me that are not in the essay are as follows, and you have to stay with me because I'm just going to be asking you a lot of questions. Can the natural environment sustain 100% digital connectivity? I think about this a lot these days because, again, being an African woman sitting in an African country, get constantly bombarded with this idea that more internet, more internet, more internet. Everybody needs to be connected. We need to have computers we need to get refrigerators first and then stick computers onto them. More internet is always better. Can the natural environment sustain 100% digital connectivity? Where will the electricity come from? Where will the raw materials come from? Where will the plastic come from, and then where will it go? If not, what is the most just way of distributing the resources in a way that makes sense for human beings and for the rest of the natural environment? Because we have to share this planet with the trees and the rivers and the fish and the mountains. And given the climate crisis that is already upon us, the wave is cresting. What would be a just way to distribute those resources in a way that doesn't condemn certain people to remaining disconnected because they happen to be from certain parts of the world? And I ask myself, as I said in the beginning, who will we be What will we look like? What will we prioritize when we have to make these choices? You must have heard at this point of coltan, the raw material that goes into semiconductors. Coltan gives us tantalum, and tantalum gives us semiconductors. Semiconductors make mobile phones and computers work. Most of the world's coltan comes from Africa. It comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the worst war that you have never heard of has been raging for the last 20 years. 71% of the coltan that we use is newly mined, 20% comes from recycling. Did you recycle the last phone that you got rid of, or did you just upgrade to the new iPhone because it was time? 60% of all the mining stock of the companies that mine coltan are registered in Canada. But Canada has no coltan of its own. So who is benefiting from this mineral that is causing all of this disruption, that is making life? Even last week, there was an attack in Beni in eastern Congo. Where are the proceeds from this being distributed? And before you go off saying, well, Nanjala, you're not looking at the whole picture, in 2016, Rwanda, which occupied eastern DRC, accounted for 50% of global coltan production. But Rwanda has no coltan of its own. Reserves are currently being explored in Mozambique, in Afghanistan, and in Venezuela. All three in conflict regions. Where tantalum goes, so does conflict. What does a world with 100% digital connectivity look like? And who is the human in a world with 100% digital connectivity? Look, I'm not a technophobe. I have a phone. I have 2 computers. I use a smartwatch to track my running. I'm just curious. And sometimes these things take a momentum of their own. We become so accustomed to living in a world that's organized in a certain way that we don't know how to think about things in a different way. Think about plastic. You know, plastic, single-use plastic became a thing in Kenya in my lifetime. I was already a teenager by the time the first single-use plastic bottle was introduced into Kenya. I remember what it was like to go to the market with a woven basket because there was no plastic. Now, the entire country is choking in plastic. We don't know how to get rid of it. Objects, they develop a momentum of their own. They become so integrated into our daily lives that we stop asking ourselves the difficult questions about what they're doing to ourselves and to our ideas of socialization. So I'm not standing in front of you as a technophobe. I'm standing in front of you as a curious person who is wondering how much time and space we give ourselves to contemplate how the objects that we use are acting upon us. And these are 3 things that I want to tease out from that. Look, the desire for connection is a fundamental human need. I think about the pandemic. I don't know how many of you experienced the pandemic lockdowns alone, but it was a very difficult experience, being isolated from family and friends. And you realize, for many of us who live in urban areas, we realize that the vast majority of our relationships that we were experiencing, the things that kept us afloat, the virtual book clubs, the virtual film screenings, everything was happening through our mobile phones or through our computers. It's a thing that we all want. It's a thing that we reach for. So any technology that disrupts or affects our ability to connect is going to have a knock-on effect on how we understand what it means to be human. Mobile phones bring us closer together. They allow us to connect across immense geographical and spatial differences. But do we understand the new flows of connectivity well enough? Do we understand what it will be like to live in a world where people cannot find direction without looking at their phone, cannot read maps without looking at their phones? The second thing I want to think about is we are connecting at speeds and frequencies that have never been seen before at human history. We have never been bombarded with this much information in the entire arc of human history, right? Every hashtag that's calling for your attention, every forwarded message in a WhatsApp group, every time, even if you're not connected, every time the news that you watch at prime time or the radio that you listen to goes online to pick up the trending topics and relate to you, you are experiencing the digital, albeit as secondhand. So the only way you can be truly isolated is if you were completely off-grid, in which case, how did you find out about this event? I don't know how society navigates this volume of information, much of it unverified and a lot of it deliberately harmful. I was reading an article recently about WhatsApp in India and about hate speech and misinformation is disseminated on the app. And in a lot of developing countries, WhatsApp is provided for free when you buy a smartphone. I think it's also increasingly the case in the West. When you buy the phone, the WhatsApp is bundled in it automatically. There is no ARC. Those of us who were born in the last decades of the landline and grew up in the mobile phone era, we remember what it was like. We learned things, even though we didn't know that we were learning things about how to process information. And now we have this generational gap. People buy the mobile phones and they get the messages, the platforms bundled with the mobile phones, but there's no manual to it. You have to figure it out yourself. What are we doing to better understand the social and human consequences of receiving information at this scale? What is it doing to our circuits of empathy? And finally, now that so many of us are connected at scale, are we doing enough to make sure that we have the right guardrails in place to make sure that we're incubating the good and eliminating the bad? I think when you give talks like this, you're not supposed to use values like good or bad. You're supposed to kind of stay neutral and detached and things in abstract. But I've been working on these issues for a long time. And I've seen the same technology that can be a lifesaver pull a country apart in a matter of months. And I think sometimes you do have to make declaratory statements. Some things are good and some things are bad. I increasingly ask myself, is communication supposed to be frictionless? Sometimes friction is good. Some friction is excellent. If you think about it, sex is fundamentally friction. And sex is great. So what do we lose when we eliminate friction completely from communication? When people can pass on messages without giving themselves a moment to have a second impulse, to think about what it is that they're passing on, to parse through, to reflect, to ask themselves, is this going to cause harm? Is this going to help? Are we ready for a world in which bad actors are just as able to connect at speed and scale as good actors? Are we even imagining what kind of world we might be building? Or are we simply chasing this fetish of permanent, perpetual growth? I think about Facebook's expansion into Ethiopia. Again, majority happening it through the mobile phone. The company came first in 2017, officially, but there was no effort to introduce content moderation until 2019. And even so, it was in Amharic, the national language, and not in, for example, Afaan Oromo, which is the most widely spoken language. And so in October 2019, a single post written in a language, in one of the other languages, I'm not going to say which one, you can look it up, triggered a wave of protest that was so intense that 68 people died in 3 days. This is also frictionless communication. This is also speed. This is also scale. These are all the things that we're told to celebrate in a world of frictionless communication. But the things that are being communicated are maybe things that we want to have a little bit more friction. At this stage, I want to reiterate, I am not a technophobe. I do believe that connection is good. Like I said, like many people who experienced the pandemic, I was very happy to be able to go online. I was very happy to be able to have all of this connection despite this mandatory reorganization of public life. But I also write like a chicken. I'm having a hard time reading my own handwriting. I spent a lot of my career thinking about digital connectivity and mobile phones especially. And like I've said, mobile phones have changed my country. Whether it's banking, allowing women to access financing, that's the lady that you can see there. By the time mobile money was introduced in Kenya in 2006, only 27% of Kenyan adults had bank accounts. Today, anybody with a mobile phone and a national ID card can access financing, including loans. They've allowed communities, we have what we call a dual system. They've allowed people who live in urban areas to send money to relatives in rural areas, especially during emergencies like the drought that we're experiencing right now. They've allowed people to reach across divides, some of which I think you might be very familiar with, certainly in Belgium, ethnic divides, artificial constructs that divide societies in very deep ways. They've allowed people to surmount those and to build new ways of being and belonging. So this is not a diatribe against mobile phones. It's not a diatribe against technology. I am, however, a tech realist. And I think my job is to ask awkward questions to make sure that as many of us enter into the next phase of human progress, happy, healthy, and whole. I interpret my role as trying to get people thinking so that whatever we do next, we do it better. We're not going around in circles chasing illusions. Objects act on us as much as we act on them. And it is important to pay attention to these effects in order to have a sense of who we are becoming so that we can get ready and so that we can protect each other. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, they say. It's a rule of physics. But we're not doing enough, I think, to think clearly about what some of these things, infinite mobile connectivity, might actually look like and might actually do to the planet. And so I wanted to leave you with those questions to hopefully provoke you to think differently, even at a micro scale, even at an individual scale, about some of the things that we're taking for granted, about the ways in which the phone has changed everything. Na kwa hayo machache, nawatakia usiku mwema na tukutane baadaye. Thank you.